By far, the best war horses were the mares of Phares' son, Admetus. Eumelus drove them, their hoofs could fly as swift as birds. Their coats were matching and their withers level. Apollo of the silver bow had raised them in Perea. Both mares, they brought with them terror in war. Of men, the best by far was Telamonian Ajax, while Achilles was wrathful. He was far superior, as were his horses, but he lay beside his fleet of steady, curving boats and raged at Agamemnon, shepherd of the people. Beside the breaking waves his men enjoyed throwing short spears and discus and shooting with arrows. By their chariots the horses were standing still and grazing on the clover and water parsley which the mud had fed. The chariots were covered up and stored inside the leaders' huts. Achilles' men were trapezing round the camp. They missed their leader, warlike Achilles, and they did not fight. But all the other troops began to move. As when the whole earth is consumed by fire, the ground beneath them groaned, just as when Zeus, the god who loves the thunder, is enraged and whips the land in Arimi, around Typhus, where they say the giant sleeps. So roared the earth beneath the fighters' feet, so fast they sprinted all across the plain. The messenger on feet of wind, swift Iris, went to the Trojans with the dreadful news from Zeus, who wears the aegis. By the gates of Priam's house they gathered, young and old. Swift-footed Iris stood among the crowd. She made her voice like that of Priam's son Polites, swift at sprinting, who was posted beside the tomb of old Aeetes, to watch for when the Greeks might leave their ships. Resembling him, swift-footed Iris said, "Father, you always love unending speeches, now as in former times, in days of peace. But now unceasing war has risen up. I have engaged in many fights and battles, but I have never seen so large an army. Like leaves or grains of sand they cross the plain to fight before our town. I speak to you, Hector especially, do as I say. In Priam's mighty town are many allies, and languages of distant people differ. Let each commander marshal all his forces and lead his men to war." She finished. Hector, who realized a goddess had been speaking, immediately ended the assembly. They rushed to arms, and all the gates were opened. The troops leapt out, with horses and on foot. A great cacophony arose. There is a steep hill on the plain in front of Troy, with space all around, which humans called Baetia, but deathless gods call it the tomb of Agile Marine, where the Trojans and their allies were marshaled. Mighty Hector, son of Priam, and his bright helm flashing, led the men of Troy. With him, the best and largest group of troops were armed and eager with their spears. The great Aeneas led the Dardans. He was born to Aphrodite, fathered by Anchises. The goddess met the mortal on the foothills of Ida. With Aeneas came the two sons of Antior, competent in war, Archelochus and Acamas. The Trojans who lived around the farthest foot of Ida, from rich Zelia, where they drink dark water from river Aspis, had their leader glorious Pandarus, Lycaon's son, whose bow was given to him by Apollo. From Adrastia, Pitya, Apessus, and steep Mount Teria, the men were led by Amphius, who wore a linen tunic, and by Adrastus. Both were sons of Merops, from Percote, who was the best of all at prophecy and foresight. He forbade his sons to march to war where men are killed. They disobeyed, because their destinies of death and darkness carried them to Troy. From Percote and Abydos and Cestus and Practice From Percote and Abydos and Cestus and Practius and fine Arispe came men led by Asius, the noble son of Hyrtacus, whose big, bright sorrel horses carried him from Arcibe by the shores of the Celis. And Hippothous brought swordsmen from Larissa's fertile earth, Pelasgians led by Lord Hippothous, and warrior Pyleus, those two sons of Lethus, son of Teutomus. The Thracians were led by Amycus and mighty Pyros from land encircled by the Hellespont with its strong current. And Euphemus, son of Trozenus, son of kingly Ceos, led the Ciconian spearmen. And Pyrachemus led the Paeonians with their curving bows from distant Amydon beside the wide rivers Axius, whose streams spread with exquisite beauty over earth. Wild-hairy Pylaemenes led the men from Paphlagonia, the Eneti, who lived among the herds of wild she-mules, and from Cytorus, and from Sesamon, and from the famous cities by the river Parthenius, from Cromna and heights of Erythini and Egalius. The Halizones came from far away, from Alib, birthplace of silver, led by Lord Epistrophus and Odius. The Mycenaeans were commanded by two leaders, Chromius and Ennomus, a seer who could interpret birds, but augury could not protect him from black death and fate. Swift-footed Achilles' hands killed him in that same river where he massacred all those other Trojans. From far distant Asania, godlike Asanius and Phorcys led the Phrygians. They were eager for combat in the throng of battle. Those who had been born beneath Mount Talmus, named Maeonians, were led by Antiphus and Meslis, who were sons of Telemenes. Their goddess mother was the lake Gygia.